Welcome everyone. As we wait for participants to join, I put a question for everyone who's joining. If you can add into the chat what your favorite summer snack is or what's a popular snack in your community. And we'll get started in just a few moments. Loving all the fruit ideas and the ice cream, definitely +1+1. We're gonna wait 1 to 2 more minutes and we'll get started. Shaved ice, I love that. All right, everyone, we are going to get started with the webinar. Thank you all for joining. And thank you for adding in your favorite summer snack or a popular snack in your community. We saw a lot of fruit options, shaved ice cream, all very yummy, and specific to summer. My name is Janine Rios, and I'm going to be the moderator for the webinar today. Next slide, please. And as you know, today's webinar is going to be about rural communities. And we have some really special guests today to talk about how they've really paved the way with innovation and teamwork to create solutions in their communities with promising practices in their school meals programs. Some things to know, you may or may not know that food insecurity is higher in, can we go back to the other slide, sorry. Higher in rural communities, and compared to urban communities, it's about 16% in rural communities and 13% in urban communities. So we know that there are challenges, and a lot of times they're connected to other challenges in rural communities, such as infrastructure situations, social determinants of health, finances, resources, that kind of thing. Something that we've also learned and working in rural communities is there's great strength and there's great community. There's a lot of grit, an attitude of like, we are going to find a way, and coming together, and also sharing solutions. So with the programs you're going to hear about today, you're going to hear about those stories and how these communities have just really come together to find those solutions. Next slide, please. So just some things to know, because I know when I'm on a webinar, I always want to know, am I going to get the slide deck? Am I going to get these resources that have been shared? So the slides deck will be shared with all registrants and all participants, along with the recording, which also includes resources that will be shared. To engage with other attendees, please use the chat box. And if you have questions for our panelists, for the speakers, please use the question and answer box. And closed captioning is also available. Next slide. So the agenda is going to be, we're going to have a poll question right after this. Then I'm going to introduce our speakers. They're going to present for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then we are going to have a panel and just really get into the nitty gritty, ask them some more questions, sharing some resources. And then there'll be a Q&A period of 15 minutes at the end. And at the very end, once the webinar ends, there'll be a survey. So please don't leave your computer immediately. We would love to hear your feedback and learn ways to improve our process and make our webinars better. So without further ado, we're going to start with the poll if you can, Hannah. Y'all should see a poll question come up. We kind of want to know like who's in the room, who are our participants today. And let me know, Hannah, when we're getting most of the people taking the poll. We have those results. If not, we can share those in a few minutes. There we go. So mainly we have school nutrition professionals and nonprofit organizations in the house today. We have some administrators, community orgs, and other. If you are an other, can you please, if you feel comfortable, just add who you are into the chat. All right. So without further ado, our panelists consist of Gay Anderson, School Nutrition Director in Sioux Falls, and we have Andrea Cruz, who is also School Nutrition Director in Brandon Valley, and both of these locations are in South Dakota. Then we'll get to hear from Silka West, who's a Food Service Director at Sinton ISD, Independent School District here in Texas, along with Mia Medina, one of our Senior Program Managers here in Texas on the No Kid Hungry campaign. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to Gay.
All right, well, thank you, Janine. We can just jump into the next slide right away, please. I'm going to give you a quick overview of where I currently am. I actually was in the Brandon Valley School District, the one that Andrea is going to speak to in a couple minutes. But 2.5 years ago, opportunity came and I took over the Sioux Falls School District. So we're not really technically rural, but I was still involved in the planning stages of the rural planning that we came up with. Just to give you a quick idea of what my district is like, though, we have 25,000 plus students, 34 different schools, plus daycares and contracted meals that we do with different groups. My secondary schools are all full service kitchens where we can cook on site. And the pictures you see here are some pictures of what my elementary school's central kitchen looks like. We have a lot of hot food carts that you see on the bottom picture that get, we ship food out every day. We have a fleet of 9 trucks that take it to the 23 elementary schools. And there's a lot of wheels in motion where about between 10,000 and 11,000 hot lunches are served every day out of this, or prepared out of this facility. We kind of look at our lunch average daily participation right now. It's around 15,450. And unfortunately, my juniors and seniors have open campus, so I lose about 4,000 students just in that opportunity, which breaks my heart. And then breakfast is right around 4,460. But I want to talk more about the exciting piece, which is on the next slide here. And this starts with about 6 years ago. I started meeting with different superintendents and business managers within our state of South Dakota. And the business managers were the ones running the programs. They were the ones in charge of the food service program, having to wear all these different hats. And they were saying, we need help. What do we do? There's so many things. And it kind of became a passion of mine, thinking, how could we help them out? And so I started brainstorming. We met together a few times, talked about, wouldn't it be neat if we could kind of combine forces? But how would it work? You can't do it for free. I mean, we've got to figure out how to make this work, unless we could come up with some funding. And I had the great opportunity to attend one of the No Kid Hungry conferences and visit with some of the key people, key leadership there, and sharing the dream about, I've got about 10 schools that would love to get together, work together and talk on what we could do and come up with this shared dream of helping reduce the overall workload, cutting back on having to rewrite the menu every month, giving some key information on what are some of the regulatory pieces, along with, let's combine your buying power and get a buying group put together, help these districts. And when we're talking districts, we're talking some as small as around 120, 140 students. So I think the largest one is right around 670. And so when you're talking these districts, and they're probably all within, most of them are within about a 40-50 mile range of each other. We have one, I think, that was about 100 and some miles away. And so it's like, how can we help them? Because they need the success. So No Kid Hungry came to visit on a cold January day. We had a couple of key people from No Kid Hungry come out, toured these schools and said, hey, we're in. So we partnered with the districts with a grant from No Kid Hungry, figured out how we can make this work, sold it to them, sold it to my school district, by saying, I have some funding to help make this pay for my time. And the benefit that we can also do at the district at that time was bringing on an assistant director. So we signed agreements, we got everybody on board, we started the first buying group, and we're able to save them a ton of money already up front that first year in their food purchases. Then we hired our assistant director, registered dietitian, who is my great partner here, Andrea Cruz, who I'd worked with her and known her for a number of years. And when I hired her, I didn't know that I'd be jumping ship 6 months later to leave her in charge of my former district when I was offered a different position. But she's been a great team player and just the right person for the role. And so we actually made that dream become reality. And when we were able to do that, we kicked off what really is a neat thing that has benefited the districts. And I'm not going to keep on talking about this because I'm going to let Andrea take over from here, except for the fact that I just want to say none of this could have been done without No Kid Hungry, understanding what our needs are, understanding what we needed to do, and partnering and talking with each other, and then really listening to see what their needs are, what these school districts needed. And so we got the right people in place with superintendents, school board members, business managers, and the different districts. And then I hired the next right person, as in Andrea, and I'll let her take it away from there.
Thank you. So I'll give a little bit of overview about my own district as well and my background, and then kind of give you the nitty-gritty on the Dakota 10, soon to be 11, which is what we like to call ourselves. So like Gay mentioned, I am in Brandon Valley School District, Brandon, South Dakota. Our total enrollment district size is about 5,000. We're a suburb of Sioux Falls, which is a very large city for South Dakota size in South Dakota. And so we are constantly growing and changing. And so right now we have 8 full service kitchens, 8 schools. So we don't do any transferring of food. Everything is done on site, which I'm so blessed and very happy that we're able to do that for our students. Average daily participation for us is about 810 at breakfast, which is pretty low. And lunch average daily about 3,400. And so we're constantly trying to find ways to improve that and get those numbers a little bit higher. I previously was the registered dietitian. I worked as the dietitian for about 6 months and then took over as the director. And as the director, one of my favorite things about school nutrition is that it's much more than just food service. And so there's areas in so many different ways that school nutrition and child nutrition programs can become involved in the schools and in the community. So a few different ways that we've done that at Brandon Valley. We've kind of started to implement some more farm to school within our district. And I'm encouraging the districts that we work with, which I'll get to in a second, to also take part in that. So working with local community farmers and finding ways to get those good quality products into our buildings. We just recently launched a nutrition education in the classroom program. And so we're very proud of being able to offer nutrition education from registered dietitians into our students' classroom, which is a super cool benefit that we are able to do and are excited to continue. And then, of course, the reason why I'm here today, the Dakota 10. So we are soon to be 11 schools. And so if you want to just go to the next slide, we'll kind of give an overview. Gay talked a lot about how the program became and how much amazing work she did to get this whole program off the ground and to hire me as the dietitian within the district to help these schools. And this kind of is where we are now and where we're going. So the whole point of the shared services model was really just to offer assistance to schools that maybe didn't have access to all the resources that larger districts might have. For example, a registered dietitian, those smaller schools a lot of times were run by business managers. So they wear 7 different hats and one of them is running the child nutrition program. So it's hard for them to focus their energy on making sure they're following the guidelines and writing the correct menus and following all of the guidelines. So we were able to provide support in that area. A few of the different things that were really key players here, the buying group, we were able to save these schools thousands of dollars every year. Even just, we compared, I think it was 5 invoices from some schools that were within our buying group and then others that were not. And on those 5 invoices alone, it was almost a $2,000 savings to be part of this group. And so that's a huge savings when you're looking for year round. I think it calculated to almost $10,000 estimated savings for the school year on food alone, which is awesome. Nutrition assistance, we took out the days of writing monthly menus and transferred all of these schools into cycle menus to help with some different nutrition analysis things and inventory control, cost control, all of that stuff. We provided technical support whenever needed. If schools are under annual review, we're able to answer questions and do all of those things as well. So we're just here to help them in whatever ways we can. And then go ahead to the next slide. And so moving forward, the goal of the program was, it started as a grant funded program, but we wanted to make sure that it was self-sustainable as we move forward. And so this is kind of where we are now. I'm very happy to say that we are now a self-sustainable program. Grant funding will no longer be a part of the program moving forward as of, I think, July 1st. And so we actually had the capacity to bring on one more school. And so we will be the Dakota 11 starting in July. And I'm very excited that we're able to provide that benefit to so many school districts in the state of South Dakota. Total enrollment among the schools is about 4,200. And so, that doesn't sound like a very big number, but we definitely have a big impact on some of these smaller schools and helping them get by. So if you have questions or have anything that you want to pick our brains about, Gay and I are both very much willing to answer questions and provide feedback and help however necessary or however we can. So both of our contact information is there. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gay and Andrea, for all that you shared. And next slide. Because we know that people are going to have so many more questions that we have time for, I wanted to share some recent resources that Gay and Andrea helped create, which are tips for launching a shared services model program in school nutrition. And then the other resource is kind of a success story that just talks about exactly like what happened, like Gay mentioned how it started, how they came together. What are some of those fine-tuned, nitty-gritty points that you need to make this successful that you may not think about on the front end that they've already gone through? So these two resources will be shared with you. And also, if you're looking for resources in rural communities, we also have a rural communities page at the Center for Best Practices that you can access to find more resources there as well. And so I will now, we're going to pass it to Mia Medina and Silka West to give you their stories and their successes and their challenges as well. And then we'll have some panel questions for the group.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. My name is Mia Medina, and I am the Senior Program Manager for No Kid Hungry Texas. For those of you who aren't familiar, at No Kid Hungry Texas, we provide grants, resources, and technical assistance to school districts and community organizations to help them strengthen their meal programs. But part of my work is managing the Texas Rural School District cohort, which I designed and launched in 2020. Next slide, please, Hannah. So on this slide, it details a little bit about our cohort and how it came to be. We provided $30,000 in funding each to cohort members to help them fund community-centered ideas to addressing rural hunger among their students. Additionally, we had them meet frequently so that they can share ideas, collaborate, and learn more about things like farm to school initiatives and school gardening and more. And we are on our second cohort now, and we currently have a grant opportunity to open our third cohort. But the picture here that you see, you'll see all of our locations of our cohort members, which is pretty spread apart across our big state. Next slide. There's so many, I think one of my favorite things about this cohort program is that there's so many innovative ideas and programs happening out in rural communities. And I know for Janine and I, we really enjoy getting to hear about these programs and of course, seeing them in action. So for example, one district chose to implement cooking demos in the community because they identified that it was really important for families to understand not only how to eat healthy, but also how to prepare healthy foods at home. Another purchased an industrial air fryer to increase meal quality in the cafeteria. And Silka, who you're about to hear from next, was able to utilize her funds to meet her community needs too. There's been so many positive outcomes from this program, both quantitative and qualitative. And as you'll see on this slide, Marcina shared that she was able to boost breakfast participation to about 90%, utilizing breakfast in the classroom. But we also heard things like, from parents and kids who are really excited about new offerings. So one district shared that after implementing a coffee bar, a parent was like, wow, we never get cool stuff like this in our community. And then because of our calls where we met often, many folks expressed that it was really easy for them to get siloed in their own individual communities. So hearing from others and being able to pitch ideas to their peers across communities really helped them to be innovative and think outside the box, and for a lot of folks be really excited about their work again. And particularly during the pandemic, when things are really challenging for a lot of folks expressed feelings of solidarity because the challenges that they were bringing up weren't just their challenges, and so they were able to share some ideas on how to overcome them together. Next slide, please. And that picture is from Smithville ISD. It's one of my favorite pictures of all time, where we had the cooking demos a couple months ago. But as we enter our third cohort, we're continuing to center rural voices, their lived experience. We plan on launching alumni calls so that we can continue networking and collaborating with one another and collecting best practices so we can share learnings across the US. And of course, utilizing their expertise to help us think about how to create systemic change that will benefit rural schools, kids, and families overall. So now, if you'll go to the next slide, I'm actually going to turn it over to Silka West, who's the Food Services Director at Sinton Independent School District. She was part of our pilot cohort, and I wanted her to share with you all a little bit more about the innovative work she was able to do during our time together.
Thank you very much, Mia. Hello, everyone. I am Silka West, Food Service Director at Sinton ISD. We're about 30 miles away from Corpus Christi. It's nice to be here with you today. And next slide, please. So we were very fortunate to be a recipient of the No Kid Hungry grant and be part of the Texas Rural Schools cohort, which we really enjoyed our participation in this grant. And I'm going to speak a little bit more here in a few minutes about what we did with the grant. But when we looked at grant opportunities from our district, we really weren't familiar with grant work in the food service program. And in fact, I find that a lot of the 57 contracting entities in my region are scared to approach grants because they feel like it's a very involved process, that perhaps they don't have adequate staffing to carry through a grant project work. We looked at it because we were in the height of the pandemic. Well, actually, we looked at the grant before the pandemic, but we implemented elements of the grant throughout the pandemic. In hindsight, we realized, oh my goodness, how much more value this grant and this opportunity was to us that we didn't even fully understand or comprehend at the onset of the grant. So we received the invitation. When we received the invitation or we became aware of the grant opportunity, the first thing we did in our district was try to identify what need did we have in our district with our students and with the community to figure out what would we use this grant for, what would we use it for, and how would we make it sustainable going forward. So we did a bunch of student surveys, we did community surveys, and that helped us identify stakeholders because we learned from our community and from our students what the need was. We also looked at, when we went into applying for a grant, was there flexibility in implementation, because we were fairly new at grant program management and fairly new at grant operations and special projects. We found the grant to be very user-friendly, and we found the reporting and record-keeping process to be very user-friendly. Next slide, please. So what lens did we choose to use going into our grant? We chose to use the lens of food insecurity. We know that this is a nationwide health issue and a societal issue, but it was definitely an issue in Sinton, Texas. Part of that was because of the pandemic, and we are looking at our community to see how things have improved or not improved as the pandemic has started, or as it is officially declared over. But this is the lens we used going into it. And through those surveys and talking with community members, identifying stakeholders that we could have targeted conversations with, we learned that food insecurity was a huge issue in our community before the pandemic, but amplified so much throughout the pandemic. Next slide, please. So what we learned about our own community that I can share with you, we're only a community of 5,500 residents. We have 2,100 students. We're a small community, and we're only 30 miles away from Corpus Christi. However, there is the bridge that crosses the water from our neighboring community to Corpus Christi. And what we learned through these targeted discussions is that not a lot of our residents were comfortable driving in to Corpus Christi. And so we learned that our community is very tight-knit and tries to be self-sufficient, but because we are rural and we don't have a lot of stores around us, we do have a small HEB, we do have a dollar store. Other than that, they don't have any other food sources unless you consider a convenience store a food source. So looking at that, we realized that the diversity of our town, we're very close knit. We don't have a lot of our residents that travel out to gain access to more exposure, to gain access to more foods. We also found that a lot of our community was one vehicle households. And so that person is the person that works, and they work outside of the community. So a lot of our residents, the guardian and maybe the kids who weren't in school, or kids when they were out of school, were at home without a vehicle. So we learned a lot about our little town during these stakeholder identifications and targeted conversations. Next slide, please. So we engaged our community. The moment we knew we were going to apply for the grant and we were awarded for the grant, we engaged our community in activities. You can see here on this slide, this involved our students, It involved special groups such as Center for Youth, which are youth that when they're out of school, they get together and they have guardianship and educational activities. We involved our agriculture group, and during the A&H show, our health fair, which is our community at a large. We have 2 community events, the annual spaghetti supper and the homecoming parade. And then throughout the pandemic, we made a new connection, and that was a partnership with the County Emergency Management District. And I'll speak a little bit more about our engagement with these stakeholders here in the next slide. So next slide, please. So what did we do with our grant and how did we engage those stakeholders? Through our surveys and throughout the pandemic, we recognized that our families, especially our older students, needed more nutrition. We provide school breakfast, we provide school lunch. We were also a recipient of the Texas Department of Agriculture Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, but only elementaries are eligible for that by invitation only grant. So our middle school and our high school students in their surveys were still hungry late in the day. So part of our grant project was to provide fresh fruits and vegetables at our middle school and our high school to our students so that they had sustainable nutrition throughout their long school day. We also provided holiday snack bags, is kind of what we called them. And prior to Thanksgiving meal break, prior to Christmas meal break, prior to spring break, and prior to summer break, we packed a snack bag for every student in Sinton ISD, and we distributed those snack bags. And then also emergency meal services. We provided emergency meal services during Winter Storm Uri. Next slide, please. This is an example of the fresh fruit and vegetable snack bags that we did. We did a Eat a Rainbow Day. And so we packed a snack bag that had fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and nutrition education materials in it. And a bag like this was distributed to every student in Sinton ISD. Next slide, please. Holiday snack bags were a variety of whole grain items, shelf-stable fresh fruit items, and then shelf-stable like fruit snack items. Or it included also like a shelf-stable milk or a shelf-stable beverage, such as 100% vegetable juice or fruit juice. Next slide, please. This is Winter Storm Uri. This was not originally part of our grant work, and I know I'm almost done with my time here, so I'll speed through this really quick. This was not part of our original grant work, but what I wanted to share with everyone on this webinar today is that when I mentioned earlier this grant was flexible, we had a need in our community that arose during our work with the Texas Rural Schools cohort and the No Kid Hungry grant, and this need was not originally planned. However, all I had to do was contact our representatives with No Kid Hungry, identify the need to them, explain to them what our emergency meal service plan was going to be, and got approval for us to change the scope of our work in less than a day's notice to meet our community's need during one of the most emergent times. Next slide. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Silka. And you did it in time. Amazing. So much information was shared. And we do have a question specifically for you, but I have a question first that I wanted to ask the group, because you both mentioned how No Kid Hungry helped with the program. So I would like to know, especially as someone who might not have access or there might not be that grant, how would you do this? How would you find these same resources if you didn't have No Kid Hungry to support the work?
I'll jump in. Now that we know how the pilot worked, I think it's important to know that the districts or the partners have to have some meat in the game. And by creating what that model looks like for those that are interested in pooling resources, then you can determine, you could kind of go backwards in determining what the cost or the funding would actually be for getting it kicked off. And there's multiple ways it could actually be done. And I think the way that we were able to do it with the Brandon Valley, Dakota 10 group and all that was that we actually took it and we were able to offer all these other added services that they never would have had. You know, some pilots or some programs, they might look like, well, we don't need to have all the benefit of maybe our menus written for us, so they don't need the dietitian. My belief is we put the best that we could together to make it work. And obviously it's kind of neat to be able to look back 3 years after the fact and my hands are, I've let go of it and know that it's in good hands and know that it was done in a way that it's totally sustainable.
Awesome. Silke, what do you think you would have done? Thank you for sharing, Gay. Say there was no Mia, what would you have done?
For us in Sinton ISD, a result of what we learned from this experience is that we had never done grant work before. So we gained a lot of confidence, a lot of insight into processes, procedures, record keeping, reporting. It is part of our day-to-day business that we do anyway. But from this opportunity, we expanded services, we expanded communication with stakeholders, we went beyond the normal box and thinking, and we have learned so much more. We've made so many more connections. We've gained so much confidence that now we are able to do those things without grants. We do, however, apply for every grant we possibly can to always try to bring a new experience to our students. We are student focused first and foremost, and we do listen to our community. But I would say if there's not grant work, to definitely talk with other, or not grant opportunities, to definitely feel like don't feel like you're on an island. There are other rural schools out there. There are also other maybe larger or mid-sized districts that have a little bit more experience in some of the areas maybe where you need, and just start having communications, just start talking with others, and then looking internally at what resources you do have, and then trying to just take baby steps, you know, focus on one initiative and try to start implementing that. And I know that sounds very basic, but that is what we did. We focused on an initiative, we took baby steps, we built upon it. I'm currently applying for the Healthy School Meals Initiative grant, which is, you know, a large grant. Don't know that we'll get it, but we've learned that we're no longer scared to apply for grants. And that's not just us internally. That also means my district stakeholders who were nervous about our program applying for grants. And a lot of times what we saw is the district would decline applying for a grant because they did not feel they had anyone to do the work. And we spoke up and said, but wait, we can do this. Our department can do this. There's a need. The community's saying there's a need. Let us have that opportunity. So if there's opportunities exist, maybe it's not the district that applies, but maybe your department can be that representative that applies for a grant. And if you don't get a grant, your department, Andrea mentioned to this earlier, we are so much more than food service. We are a connection to the community.
That is so true. And something that I noticed from both of your programs is you had the vision before the grant actually became available or came into existence. So I would definitely want to encourage everyone on the line, the work that you want to do, that vision, that passion that you have, continue to make it happen, talk to people. Gabe shared with us that she was talking to superintendents even a couple years before the whole thing came together, with just her idea and just sharing it out there, and just building that energy that I think brings people like us, our ears, and probably others to want to support you. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. There's a specific question in the chat for Silke, so I want to address that first. So there was a question asking, during those listening sessions, who specifically led the listening sessions and how did that come about? Was it a best practice, or was it something just within your school culture that you found the specific person to lead it, or how did that unfold?
Sorry, I actually led the stakeholder sessions, but that is because I am not shy and I'm comfortable with public speaking. However, like a lot of my district stakeholders, that was not their comfort zone. So as long as I was willing to do it, I was happy to do it. However, finding that person who does have that confidence and desire to speak to a group of stakeholders is key. We have a public communication officer in our district, and she's very comfortable with the online communication, the school reach communications, but when it comes to face-to-face public communication, that is not her preference. And so knowing that I was comfortable with that, we partnered together. She helped me get people to the table, and I was willing to speak to those individuals and share and host these sessions. So again, identifying that person first and foremost who's willing to convey the information, and then maybe having a stakeholder that knows the individuals and can help get those individuals to the table. That was one of our best practices, and we've carried that forward. We've made that connection now, and we carry that forward, especially if we're doing anything that's implemental change in the food service program, or if we're doing anything of bringing value added services, something new to our students.
Thank you for sharing that. And something that we hear a lot, teamwork makes the dream work, but in reality, that's kind of the way it happens. And you don't have to have every skill, but you can identify, is what I hear you saying, other people to make that happen. Awesome. Well, I have some prepared questions that I pulled from the registration. So as y'all registered, people sent in questions, and so I wanted to make this relevant and address those questions with the group. And one of a very popular question wanted to know what's going on with non-congregate in rural areas. Since that is, the new regulations is allowing it, what has been your experience? How have you found ways to make that work or not? And within that question, someone asked, are food banks taking advantage of this option for summer 2023? And I'll kick it off to whoever wants to go.
I'll jump in again. I'm not bashful. The non-congregate piece, actually, in my own current district, I fought for it in a roundabout way to be able to have that offering, because we have a couple of our schools within the Sioux Falls School District. They're not rural, technically rural, but they're food deserts, and we don't have, we're not able to currently this summer offer any kind of summer meals in those areas. So I thought, oh, this would be perfect. We could pull up and, see if we could do the non-congregate. And it's very specific that it is meant for rural areas. And my experience with the Dakota 10 is a lot of those schools, they didn't really qualify necessarily because they're free and reduced and area, their numbers and census data doesn't dictate that. So unfortunately, it's not helping us out really a lot in the state of South Dakota.
I can also share from Sinton ISD's perspective, because of the new rules regarding non-congregate feeding and USDA's definition of what defines a rural school. Sinton ISD did not qualify for the Texas pilot group this summer. So we do not get to do non-congregate feeding this summer. However, we did do non-congregate feeding during the pandemic. We have a lot of best practices to share. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share those out. It was a wonderful experience for us, for our community. It was a growth experience for our department. And I have district stakeholders to this day that still tell me, oh my goodness, we can't believe y'all shifted your business model with less than a day's notice. We were told Sunday night that we needed to start providing meals Monday morning, and we did. And then we also did it non-congregate style. And I'll just briefly share what that looked like. We had one curbside location. We do have 5 campuses, but we chose one. And that was because of the logistics of how easy it was for households to pull up curbside. So we did non-congregate curbside multiple meal distribution, and that's because of the time and place waivers that were in place, a lot of the waivers that were in place at that time. But we also did home delivery, and home delivery for us was about 30 students, and it was 27 households for 30 students. And those households were identified as part of our non-discrimination plan. And those were households who had students that were either disabled or the household member was disabled that prevented them from getting to our curbside location. So we saw success in both of those, and it did stretch us quite, it stretched us quite a bit, but we also learned so much. We did it successfully, and my staff, my team knows now that should that ever pop up again, we got it. We can do this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Does anybody else want to add anything on the panel?
Yeah, I'll just chime in and share. There are some food banks who are really stepping in and doing some non-congregate feeding. I think from a Texas perspective, our summer starts a lot earlier than a lot of folks. I've spoken to several people this week who are already out of school. And so, you know, I think besides the requirements that Texas has, it has been really difficult, I think, for people who already had a summer meals plan in place and their operations in place to kind of switch. But I'm excited about the opportunity to kind of watch and see how this summer goes, and then also see how next summer goes. I hope more folks are able to do it and able to participate.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. The next question is, what can urban districts learn from rural schools regarding school meals? What are some tips and tricks that you can share with urban districts? And we'll start with Andrea, not to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I think there is a lot that larger districts can learn from smaller districts. I can kind of look back to my own experience in working with smaller schools that have less than 800 or less than 700 students K through 12, and some of the lessons that I have learned just and been able to apply to Brandon Valley. One of those is scratch cooking. As we get more into the weeds with some of the different nutrition guideline updates and things like that, and lower sodium, I think some of the fear that, you know, my own staff has is that in order to make those things happen, we might have to do a little bit more scratch cooking. And that's just not something that we do on a day-to-day basis. We are very much a heat and serve type of operation, and we kind of find fun ways to use those heat and serve foods. But I've definitely learned some lessons in terms of, you know, how to do scratch cooking more efficiently and what kind of equipment might be most useful in order to make those things happen. And then I think another just general lesson is resourcefulness. You know, we have more resources in larger school districts, and the bigger the school district is, probably the more resources you have available to you. And smaller school districts don't have that. And so don't always have that. And so when I go into those districts and, you know, maybe a problem that I'm having, they're having the same thing, but they've already overcome it because they have had to kind of do some work around and be unique and innovative. And so I think they're very good at adapting and having that innovative approach.
Thank you. Would anyone else from the panel like to address that question?
I would like to just share one perspective. I've had an opportunity to be in a large urban school district and now in a rural school district, and I've seen the difference. And I think one of the lessons I learned, if I were to go back to a large urban school district, is that in a large community, it's easy to go unnoticed because you're part of a large population. Your operation becomes very systematic. So being in a rural school district, connection to community is so much more important. So I would encourage urban school districts to learn that connection that a rural school district has with their community. And during pivotal times, pivotal changes, such as these proposed nutrition standards that are coming through, learn to really connect with the community and try to educate them and share with them, and maybe not just make it a procedural change and a process change and no one understand why. That is one of the encouragements I would say, or one of the things I think an urban district could learn from rural, is that connection to community is key, especially during large changes to the program.
Awesome, thank you so much. You may have covered that already with this next question, but how can nonprofit partners of rural schools align themselves to best support the practices covered in this webinar? And we can start with whoever wants to jump in.
I mean, I can start as a nonprofit representative. I think that the most important thing that nonprofits can do, outside of unrestricted funding or flexible funding, not every nonprofit has the ability to provide funding, and totally understand that, but really coming in with a listening ear. Come in and listen first and know that this is going to take some time, but making sure that you're not coming in and saying like, here's all the things that we could fix, right? Because like, what I tell people all the time, and I remember telling Silka this too, is like, I was a rural student. I graduated with 50 people, but I've never been in your job and I don't live in your community. So like, teach me about your community, teach me about the needs that you have, and help me understand so that I can come in and figure out how to support you. So that's the advice that I would give is listen and take time.
I can hop on in terms of from more of like the school district perspective. I think it goes both ways. So I think the smaller school districts, those more rural districts, also have to be very open and willing to listen to some of these new ideas. One of the things that we encountered during working with some of the more rural districts was change is really hard for not only for big districts and but also just for everybody. So making the change, and a lot of the time it was, well, why? So making those changes, providing that, asking questions, and then from the nonprofit side, I think also just like providing ideas and providing reasoning. So whenever I requested a change or suggested, hey, I think we should switch to cycle menus, here's why. And then asking for input, making sure that they feel like they're part of the team, I think definitely helps making sure and getting that buy-in as well.
I would also just like to share, Gay mentioned, providing insight, and I think providing connection to resources, non-monetary, because as Mia mentioned, not everyone has the funding to be able to provide grant funding or financial support. But in rural schools, we don't know, or what we see in our area, not all the stakeholders, like the directors or maybe assistant directors, we see that not all the food service personnel can get to trainings that maybe are offered in their region. So if they have a connection with a nonprofit, maybe that nonprofit is who they've built a relationship with, and that person can maybe be a connection to resources that are of value to them to keep their learning, their growing, and their procedures and policies moving forward.
I'll just add one more thing here too. I think it was amazing that, and I'll use the example we had. We would meet frequently with Janine and No Kid Hungry staff to talk about what are some other things we could do to help you, helping brainstorm some different ideas. So we've got them coming in. So here's our issues. These are the things we're running into. And we had an unlimited supply of resources from you guys in that aspect. And that was really neat to be able to say, okay, here we can take this back to like the Dakota 10 group or whoever it may be. So utilize the ones that have seen things across the country and different ideas. My favorite saying, which I've taken from somebody else, is we're all into R&D, which is not research and development, but it's rip off and duplicate.
I love it. Don't reinvent the wheel and then reinvent it again. Someone has likely already done it. So thank you so much for sharing. I heard you all really emphasize listening, and there's a huge opportunity for non-monetary resources as well. And so just reaching out and building those connections, I know that that's really important and something that Gay's talked about a lot. And that is building her network and just really taking that passion, talking about it wherever you go, and figuring out who's best to partner with and who's interested, which makes a difference. Another question that came up multiple times was, what are some of the challenges or the biggest challenge for rural districts in school meals?
I will hop in here, and I think what I tell the schools that I work with all the time is, you don't know what you don't know. So lack of resources for some of our Dakota 10 schools has been kind of one of the biggest things. So don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, we're here now, so the resource is available. And if we can't provide it for you, I will find somebody that can, or create something for you. So, you know, a lot of the business managers running these programs, they are overrun with lots of other things going on. And so food service might be their lower end of the totem pole things that they're worried about at the moment. And so we just wanted to be able to provide help and resources. And to those more rural districts, don't be afraid to ask for questions and ask for help.
I'll piggyback on that too, real quick. It might be flipping the question a little bit, but I think some of the most shocking things that the districts saw were how they could save money by partnering together and not having to do the individual, you know, procurement, and finding out that, oh my gosh, you mean we can save this % up front just by having some of that, where we're pooling those things. So I think, again, I might have taken the question out of context, but the aha moments that came out of this was pretty cool.
I believe one of the in the state of Texas, we do have purchasing cooperatives, and we have the opportunity to belong to various purchasing cooperatives at no charge. We also have education service centers that provide training. What we see is our rural schools maybe can't always get to the training. So building a connection with them and making sure information gets to them and them feeling safe and secure. Because I used to be on the education service center side, and we would see a difference with our rural schools not being able to get there just because they lack staffing. They can't get out of their kitchen. And we kind of took the approach of no kid left behind. You know, a director can't get there on a regular basis. So we kind of took a team approach, and we built little small clusters to communicate with each other to get that information out. One of the other things we see in rural schools, and Gay kind of mentioned this, where business officials are overseeing the programs. Well, we may have food service managers overseeing the programs because they're so small, they're not directors, and maybe they don't know the whole program. Maybe their business side doesn't know the whole program. We see that a lot. So we're definitely working on trying to educate and inform the person overseeing the program. And if it is the food service director or food service manager or food service supervisor, we're also trying to build their communication skills so that they can inform their district stakeholders about their program. We're a district of only 2,100 students. However, I see that coming into this program, I've been here 6 years in this rural district. My administration had no clue, didn't understand food nutrition, and was not comfortable with it. So every decision I made, from learning how or making the decision to expand beyond USDA brown box and start using DOD, farm to school processing, was a communication process with the district, putting my toes in the water, taking baby steps, communicating, bringing in a piece of that, a small piece, and then building upon it once everyone saw how it worked, knew that we could be compliant. So I would say that if you know there's a need in your program and you don't feel like anyone understands but you, find a small piece that you can start with and start communicating with the district stakeholder. Find your partner that's willing to support you in that, and then try to take baby steps to see those things through and utilize the resources around you.
Thank you all for sharing. This may have kind of been covered as well by some of the answers you just mentioned, Silka. But this is specific for Gay and Andrea. What can the shared services model look like across multiple districts, larger districts, or I guess different across the nation in non-rural districts?
I can start.
We'll probably have somewhat the same answers. In the end, we're all about feeding kids. And so we're all wanting to do what we can do best, whether we're large districts, medium-sized, or small districts. And so pooling resources, networking with each other. I would not be where I am today without my colleagues across the state, across the country that I've gotten to know, where, you know what, we're all in it together. We're not competitive. We all want to make sure everybody else succeeds. We're going to tell you when we had a failure so you don't have that, or you can fix it so it doesn't fail. And so that's part of what larger districts can do to combine together. You do have to probably be humble when you're getting together and know that you can't always have your own way. We have to, come up with, well, how can we do this? Reduce maybe X number of SKUs for how many kinds of chicken can you have, that we reduce it down to one chicken nugget. We always pick on the chicken nugget, but that's an easy one to use as an example of that. We've got to figure out how we can partner together and work that out. And Andrea, I'll let you spin from there.
Yeah. So I kind of going off what Gay said, it's all about finding common ground, I think, but also understanding that each different district is going to have its own differences. So, we're all here to feed students. That's our common ground. And then just finding ways that each district can help others. What other resources can they provide? I always tell my staff, don't get tunnel vision, be open to new ideas. And some things that you never thought would work in your own district might be one of the best things that ever happened. So just try to be open and ask questions. And then I think Silka mentioned it earlier, some of the larger districts don't have as much community involvement, and so it's very systematic occasionally. And so I think, that goes back to be open to new ideas, get involved with your community, find ways in which your community can be involved with your program, and just kind of spread the word and get involved.
Thank you, and thank you. And also don't forget everyone on the line that they have, Gay and Andrea, work to create some resources that capture a lot of the lessons learned, some of the challenges, and just kind of the whole in and out of their process. And you have their contact information if you have questions. We still have a good 11 minutes, and we have a lot more questions that were posed to us ahead of time. So if you have any burning questions now, please put them in the chat. But if not, I will continue with the questions that we had previous. And the next one is for the Texas Rural Cohort. How has working with other districts in this cohort helped your district?
For Sinton ISD, working with the other rural districts in this cohort was eye-opening. One of the things I've seen in my career since 1996 being in school nutrition, it's easy to feel like you're on an island by yourself when you work in school nutrition, because not a lot of other people understand our program, understand our rules. Some of them don't want to deal with them and don't want to understand our program or hear about our program because it's super complex. In connecting with the partners in the Texas Rural Schools cohort, it really felt like you weren't on an island. There was a connection beyond our own family here in this region, and it really helped us see the bigger picture across our state, especially. And I think I gained a broader perspective of our state and our children's needs across the state. And why that was helpful and how I learned from that was because we are a district that allows transfers in. So we have students coming in from from different regions of our state. And it really was helpful to hear from these different Texas rural schools what their barriers were, what their challenges were, what their ideas were, what was unique about their communities. And that gave us a lens for understanding that of maybe the 100 to 200, 100 plus students that we have transferring in are coming in with a different perspective. And it takes them time to learn Sinton ISD. It takes them time to learn our school meal process. And then also it has broadened our perspective to realize that our students that grew up here are used to eating a certain way, but they're starting to see cultural changes from some of the students that are coming from outside, and they're becoming a little more curious, still hesitant to try new things, but a little more curious. And so now we're starting to broaden our menu to take into some of those considerations. And that was from working with a lot of our Texas rural schools, just hearing the difference across our state.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a school district, but I just wanted to add to that, you know, by design, we really did try to include folks who have been in the food service space for a long time, and then some maybe who didn't. And it was just always so interesting to share the ideas around community engagement. You know, how do we engage kids and get them excited about school meals, or perhaps get their feedback? And in our second cohort, we did a lot more guest speakers. And we were also able to have, you know, the Texas Department of Agriculture come in, or we had a gardening expert come in and share how he works with school gardens. And it's always really, it always makes me really happy to hear that these calls that we have are really enlightening for a lot of folks, and they get a lot out of it, and they often hear ideas they'd never thought of before.
I'm going to add to this real quick. My former district, which is Andrea's, I met with my former superintendent at that time about 2 years before this was put together. And I said, hey, I really want to have an assistant director who would be most likely a dietitian, registered dietitian. And he looked at me, he goes, how are you going to pay for it? No way. And so further talks with some of these other districts and figuring out, you know, some of the logistics. A year later, we met together and I said, you remember, you've always told me to be bold and fearless. I'm asking the same question again today. I would like to have an assistant director / registered dietitian, but I know how to pay for it this way or this time. And so the benefit to the Brandon Valley School District, because that part of that question that you asked is what is the benefit there? Not only have the staff in Brandon Valley learned things, but Brandon Valley gained by having another dietitian. At the time, I'm not a dietitian. So at that time, we didn't have a dietitian. Now they've gained a dietitian. Actually, they have two, and they're able to do the nutrition education in the classrooms and all these other things. So it's a win-win for everybody involved in this, period.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And what I've learned by sitting on calls with the Texas rural cohort is we have seen in real time where there's been a new idea, let's say for gardening, and someone else on the call is like, you know, I've wanted to do that, but I really don't feel like I can do it. But now that I see you have done it, and there's a sharing not only of the idea, but hey, I also have this, you know, this written up document, how I did it. I would love to share that with you. So building the confidence, also seeing someone else who you can identify with, who's done it, and getting that support so you're not feeling like you're on the island, like Silka mentioned.
Janine, that is so perfect. I just want to quickly share, when we did our No Kid Hungry grant project, we were not a district that wrote into our plan that we were going to buy equipment and implement a coffee bar. However, one of our partners in the grant did, and we implemented a coffee bar this year, not through grant funding, but we were so inspired by what they shared throughout their grant work that we took that and ran with it this year. And our high school kids are so excited. So perfect example, Janine. Thank you for sharing that out on today's call.
Of course, and just know everyone on the call, this is your community. So you have access to everyone on this call, the speakers, us, you know, feel free to reach out. There's another question that is hot in school nutrition during the pandemic, and especially now that the waivers are not in place. There's a question about participation and how do you keep participation up? What are some maybe ideas you have, innovations, and just what that looks like?
Well, some of the things that we've done at Brandon, I think everybody's participation around the country decreased at least a little bit after some of those free meal things went away. And we've gone a lot to ask for feedback from your customers. I mean, that's the best way to figure out what's working and what's not working in your district. Ask the students, what do you want to see on the menu? What don't you like that's on the menu right now? And so we've done some different like taste testing things with our students of new menu items. We've tried adding different things, taking things away, and then, you know, just consistently work on improving the quality of your program and of your food as well. You know, there's always room for improvement. Even if you have the best food ever, something can be improved within your program. And so just keep working towards that best improvement. Find ways, if you can partner with classes at the high school, find ways to market your program or rebrand your program if you can. We have a marketing class here at Brandon Valley that I'm working with to try and sort of rebrand child nutrition, because I think Silka mentioned it's interesting what school nutrition is, because you are for the district, you're not necessarily by building, and so you're trying to create one image district wide and have that consistency. So use the resources that you have and ask around.
I think a little bit too, with where all this goes, as far as like those resources that Andrea was talking about, is the fact, I just totally lost my train of thought. How's that?
It happens.
I'll
To the
back
best
up.
of us. It'll come back, Gay. It
Never
will come
mind.
back. Not a
It goes with
problem.
getting older.
It happens. Yeah, participation has been a huge challenge that schools are dealing with across the nation. And I love what you mentioned, Andrea, about talking to the consumer, talking to the participants, talking to the students, because ultimately they are the consumer and they're the ones who is going to decide, you know, make or break. So I see that you're off mute. Did you want something? Did you have something to add?
Just very quickly, I wanted to add on to what Andrea said about, you know, student feedback is key. We launch a survey every year after spring break, and we plan spring break because we want to be able to interpret the data, the feedback that we receive. And then April, we start looking at what products do we need to change out based on student feedback. And then in May, we start running pilots on those items and looking at what they do to participation, so that we can let our customers know we heard you. Here's the different products. We host taste testing events during that time so that they can try them. We do sampling. If we don't have a chance to taste test with them before, we do samples ahead of time so that they can see what new product we're going to be running on the menu. We did that especially during when we launched our smoothies and our yogurt parfaits, because the kids are trying to make a choice. Do I want this or do I want this? And sometimes that's difficult to make. They'll go with what's familiar. So student surveys are key. Listening to those student surveys and taking baby steps and show them that you're hearing them, then engaging them in that process, trying to pilot some of those menu items. And Andrea mentioned it, quality improvement is always an opportunity in school nutrition. So for example, in our student surveys this year, our kids did not like the low sodium ranch. They did not like some of our individually wrapped whole grain items, and they were very specific about which ones. So we have good data. We just need to take action on it now, but we start taking action before the end of the school year so they know they were heard. So they don't go all summer thinking that their feedback was not heard.
That is wonderful. And I appreciate each one of you sharing, not only answering the question, but sharing what you did and kind of breaking that down. And I know we only have 1 minute. So with the 1 minute, I would like to just let each of you answer, what is your one tip for those on the call about your experience in a rural school district? And we'll start off with Andrea.
I think my best advice would be just to have a listening ear, answer question, gather as much information as you can, and encourage, meet people halfway. Change is hard. I think I already mentioned that. So that it's difficult for those districts and any districts to make that change or any changes. So meet people halfway and create a plan for bigger change in the future.
Awesome. Gay?
I would probably say, have a plan in place, going back to the dream part of it. The tip that to make it successful, get the buy-in early from the right stakeholders, the ones that are the ones that sign the checks and make the decisions in the district. And you can find some pretty amazing people that are going to be supporting you on that.
Awesome. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Mia?
Similar to Andrea, I think listening and also, come to communities with a sense of empathy and trying to understand where they're coming from and their needs and how you can help.
Thank you. Silka?
I heard it several times before me. Listening is key. So listening to the stakeholders, listening to the community, and from that, identifying needs, and then building a smart plan. Not everything gets done overnight. There may be so many things that you want to address that either you are individually passionate about, your community's passionate about, or your district's passionate about. So build a smart plan, identify those needs, and then build a smart plan out and take small steps to working towards that plan. It may take several years, but your community will appreciate the actions that you take, and they'll support you in those.
Thank you all for just all the valuable information that you shared. And I want to also thank everyone who's on the call, who stayed till the end to just really listen to all this valuable information. Remember that there will be a survey as soon as this webinar ends. We really appreciate your feedback. We would love to make this webinar experience better. So don't feel like you're going to hurt our feelings. Just give us the honest answers, and feel free to reach out, and just know that you're going to get the slides within 24 hours. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you so much for everything that was shared. This was such a valuable session. Thank you, and have a great day.